Hi everyone, Alice here. We're going to take a look at Chapter 5, the first 2 years. So birth to 2 years old. And this is biosocial development. So you will notice as we go through our textbook that most parts of the lifespan are addressed with 3 chapters. So the lifespan is broken down into different segments, including the first 2 years as the first one after prenatal development. And then the first 2 years in the textbook has 3 chapters dedicated to it, the first being biosocial, the second cognitive, and the third psychosocial. So our textbook is very comprehensive in looking at each of the different parts of the age of the lifespan. So you will notice that we don't cover all of the pages in the textbook. I select certain pages for us to read as we go along and study. So if you have an interest area that is in a part of the lifespan, and maybe I've only assigned part of 1 chapter or pieces of 2 or 3 chapters, feel free to read more um, in that in the textbook. It has all kinds of great information, but it's basically just too much to cover um, in one semester. So we've had to pick and choose to give us a good survey. So biosocial development for these first 2 years. I probably will have 2 videos to cover this piece, so unless I'm really pretty quick, hopefully I'm not, don't talk too fast, but we'll probably have 2 videos that cover this section for the Chapter 5, Biosocial Development for the first 2 years. So I am going to be going over some material starting on page 117. Our reading is 117 to 132. So you might have your textbook open because one of the ways to really study and learn your material is to look at some of the pictures, look at the graphs, and so I'll refer to things occasionally as we go along. And so it's very helpful to have your textbook available to be kind of looking at stuff. It helps to reinforce what we're talking about. So this complete handout number 2, I sometimes do in the classroom, but here on this video, we'll be doing it a little bit different. So in order to emphasize the growth rates during the first 2 years, a lot of times I think of students to do kind of what we call a thought experiment. So an average weight might be 7 pounds for a newborn. So that newborn will triple in size as far as weight goes in that first year, which is pretty amazing. So the growth rate during the first 2 years is really significant. So even just taking that first year, weight will triple if this infant, as I posed, was 7 pounds at birth. At 1 year, then it would be 21, 22 pounds. That's not unexpected when we look at a baby and then a 1 year old. We might think, because of what we've seen in our prior experiences, that that looks about right. But let's compare it to an adult. So if I'm 150 pounds, let's say, in right now, if you came back and saw me in 1 year and I had tripled in weight, I would be 450 pounds. So that's quite a change. It would be rather surprising. Whereas with the 0 to 1 year old, we aren't feeling that surprised, but it's really a significant growth rate. So that's the point here, is that during the first 2 years of life, biosocially speaking, biologically speaking, the child goes through quite a growth spurt. There are some people who would say, taking an evolutionary perspective, that this is really important at this time, that we need to have a huge growth spurt in order to get this new human, this baby, to be more independent, we'll say, able to walk or run on its own pretty quickly. in order to be safe. So there are different ways of explaining perhaps the growth rate, but that's one that I've certainly heard. So the baby continues having a significant growth rate, although it slows down between year 1 and year 2. With this baby maybe putting on another 8 or so pounds, getting to closer to 30 pounds, still a significant increase, but not as rapid of an increase as between birth and year 1. Also, let's talk about height for just a moment. Our average baby might be about 18 inches long, and they might put on about 12 inches by year 1. So again, if I'm 5'5" 1 year when you meet me as an adult, and you come back a year later and I'm 6'5", that would be very surprising. Of course, we don't expect adults to change like that, but it gives us a little bit of perspective to reflect on and consider how significant the growth rate is for this infant. It takes a lot of energy, and it certainly is an important part of their work at that time. Okay, so I'm moving on to our next slide here. This is giving us a little bit of what we've already talked about for baby growth. And one of the ways that people, particularly the pediatrician office, will talk about this is in percentiles and comparing to norms. So they will watch your baby's growth over a period of time, and compare it to many other babies' growth rates during the same time period. And they're looking for basically your baby to stay at about the same percentile. So if we have a baby who is at the 50th percentile for weight when it is born, that means 50% of the babies weigh less when they're born, 50% of the babies weigh more. We're looking for that baby to stay at about 50% the next time it comes into the office, and that would mean that it's kind of staying on track. So if there is a big discrepancy, then you might have to investigate as a nurse or a person for this baby and try and find out why there might be a discrepancy. So the last line here is about failure to thrive. So what if there is a pretty significant percentile drop and the baby, instead of being at 50% weight, is now at 40% weight? Well, so why is that discrepancy there? And a lot of times things such as an allergy might come up. Maybe the baby has a food allergy and that needs to be explored and some help given there. So that's just one example of something that might be a problem for the baby. So this chart here shows some of those percentiles. So I don't need you to look too closely at this chart, but just to sort of see how the waves or growth kind of work, that you're watching to see that your baby is staying pretty much in the same percentile with a little bit of shift being okay, but anything significant they look to see for rationale or problems that might need to be addressed. Sleep is another pretty major topic. And if you are a parent out there, you probably can relate to that. If we're looking at our textbook really quick, body changes, body size on page 118, but 119 gets into sleep. So we want the baby to have good sleep. And average newborns sleep quite a lot, maybe off and on throughout the day and the night. They need to wake up to feed because their stomachs are smaller, and so they can't hold quite as much, needing more than feeding times throughout a 24-hour day. They talk about slow wave sleep here, which is deep sleep, stages 3 and 4. And if you've taken Psychology 101, you might know more about the sleep cycle, but that's getting into that is a little bit more a different topic. But the slow wave sleep is that really deep sleep, and it tends to increase then as the baby gets a little bit older. So getting enough sleep is a really important part of a baby in reaching their full potential, that being fully rested and ready for the challenges of their day helps them to have a good optimal, is the word they use here, development and growth through their childhood. So kind of working on um, sleep is an important thing for the baby and the parents to kind of work through that. So good, solid sleep patterns, we're calling them good, although they may vary a little bit from child to child, and you work with your pediatrician or your nurse practitioner or other healthcare providers to help you understand what's good for your child. But having strong, good for your child sleep patterns correlates, means that is related to brain maturation, to learning in school, to helping the baby over these years um, get their emotional regulation down. So we all know emotional regulation is a challenge for all of us throughout the lifespan. How do you manage and regulate emotions? And for a young child, it's very difficult sometimes. We'll actually talk more about that as we go through these next few chapters. So tantrums, that sort of thing, are more common in a younger child and tend to work themselves out as the child matures. So that emotional regulation, um, that emotional kind of maturation correlates with getting good sleep. Academic success, I don't know that we're talking about that with a 2-year-old yet, but eventually as we go along, their success, their psychological adjustment is all correlated or related to good sleep patterns. So sleep is important. And then the big debate that comes up is about bed sharing, and you'll actually see that here in your textbook. There's a whole kind of opposing perspectives piece on page 120, where some cultures feel that co-sleeping, sleeping in the same bed, parents and children, is the best way to have sleep. And there are some cultures that feel as though that might be good for a little while, or maybe having the child in a crib in the same room, but then 6 months or so, or maybe even earlier, that child might need to move to their own bedroom, and that's the best way to go about sleeping arrangement. So there's a lot of debate here, depends quite a bit on a cultural perspective. So you'll see on page 120, it's really interesting, there's a chart there that gives you different countries and um, the percent of co-sleeping. So parents sleeping with the babies or with the young children in the same bed. And you'll see the United States, very small portion of people interested or doing this co-sleeping, but it's been increasing. Um, versus Vietnam, I think, has the highest percent of co-sleeping. So it can very, very much depending on culture. Some cultures might think that separating the child from the parent's bed is abusive almost to the children. So if you really think about this debate, there are reasons for and reasons against bed sharing or co-sleeping. One of the big reasons against is SIDS. SID stands for Sudden Infant Death Syndrome. And so there's always a caution around making the bed as safe as possible, and co-sleeping might is correlated again with an increase in SID. So definitely a lot of concern around not wanting to have that kind of problem. The death of the child resulting from parents in particular, if a parent has been using drugs or drinking, sometimes that is related to SIDS. Okay, so I am going to suggest that you read page 120, and I'll come back in the second video. We'll talk a bit about brain development.